So there's often this question about surrender. The question about how to surrender comes when the exhaustion of trying reaches its peak. Trying to do a spiritual practice, trying to awaken, trying to accept, trying to open, trying to meditate, trying to make your experience anything other than the way it is. Then the possibility of surrender comes to the forefront. But then the question arises, how to surrender? But the question is from the wrong place. It's not a matter of how. It cannot be done. The mind cannot understand it. There's no formula. There can be no trying to surrender, nor any trying to understand how to surrender. Perhaps a better word for it is tenderness. When a circumstance is challenging, when life rocks our world, when there is loss or pain of some kind, the idea of surrender becomes impossible. Because the mind does not want to surrender to a circumstance, an experience that it really doesn't want. So perhaps it's better to turn attention to tenderness. Tenderness is the same as surrender. Surrender is tenderness. Tenderness towards your experience. Tenderness towards your experience is not about having loving thoughts, sending kind thoughts or sending kind vibrations, thoughts of compassion towards that which is the cause of pain or suffering, whether it be another person or an event in your life, a circumstance. It's not about using the mind to do tenderness. Tenderness is what remains when you stop giving attention to the narrative. When something happens, or when we have a feeling that we don't like, we don't want, wrapped around that experience is a whole bunch of narratives. Those narratives create resistance. Those narratives create the clenched fist. Those narratives create the suffering. Tenderness is when you stop giving attention to the narratives. It's what remains. It's what remains as a kind of quietness. It's the space, the softness, not a softness that is weakness, but the softness that remains, the openness that remains. When you just let the narratives be, you stop giving your attention to those. You stop trying to figure it out, to fix it, to get rid of it, to push it away, to deny it. Whatever it is, whatever is unwanted in your experience, an unwanted feeling, an unwanted emotion in response to what's happening in your life. Tenderness is letting it be. Tenderness is not pushing away your experience. Tenderness is the openness of an inner silence. A silence that doesn't say this shouldn't be happening. This silence cannot be created by the mind and its attempt to change experience. It cannot be changed by having positive thoughts. It cannot be changed by having loving thoughts. It cannot be changed by having kind thoughts. It has nothing to do with that, because whether it's positive or negative, it is still a narrative. Whether it's positive or negative, it's still an attempt to try and fix it. Tenderness is what remains when there's no attempt to fix anything. I'm not talking about whether you should tend to circumstances or not. I'm talking about your inner experience in response to circumstances, which is where the suffering is. The suffering is not in what happens, but in how you respond to what happens. In tenderness, that is surrender. It's a surrender of the mind that is trying to fix it. That doesn't mean that the narratives go away. It doesn't mean that the discomfort goes away. It means that somehow attention, the place from which you see, the place from which you perceive, is no longer wrapped up in those narratives. It's like you come to sit, you come to fall into a deeper place within yourself. And in that deeper place, there is no division. In that deeper place, there is only the deepest acceptance. In that deeper place, there is only openness. Openness is the space within which everything happens. And who you are is openness. At the core, underneath everything, underneath divided mind, underneath resistance, underneath narrative, is only openness. Openness is that tender place within you. That meets what is here as it is. Because it is. Because it's here. That brings a whole new relationship to your inner experience. Instead of looking to change what's happening on the outside, instead of looking to fix a relationship on the outside, instead of looking to fix the world on the outside, first of all, change your relationship to your inner experience, because that's where true change begins. When you change your relationship to your inner experience, you stop operating in your life and in your world as the tight fist. You stop meeting the world as this tightness, this resistance. You start meeting the world as the open hand, and that changes everything. That changes your experience, and it changes relationships, the relationship to everything. So this simple turning towards tenderness is incredibly powerful. This simple teaching of tenderness has the power to change everything. Instead of seeking awakening, instead of seeking some state of perfection, instead of seeking some state of higher consciousness, instead of creating more and more fantasies, imaginations about what enlightenment looks like and how you're going to get there, turn towards tenderness. See in your life, in your everyday interactions, in your everyday relationship to your inner experience, see clearly. Become sensitive. When I say see, I mean become sensitive to. Sense, feel, taste the texture of your experience. Is it operating as the clenched fist? Is there a tight grip on your experience? A tight grip that is either attempting to reject it or attempting to change it in some way, to control it. And the attempt to change or reject always has a core narrative in it of this shouldn't be happening to me, this shouldn't be happening right now, this shouldn't be happening at all, this shouldn't be happening. Yeah, this shouldn't be happening. And that is also turned towards how we feel. When we feel something we don't like, perhaps irritation, discomfort, sense of rejection, offense, anger, sadness. Call it what you like. Very often there is a hidden narrative in that. Become sensitive to it. It's usually, I shouldn't be feeling like this. I shouldn't be feeling like this. If I didn't feel this, then maybe I would be happier. If I didn't feel this, I would be at peace. If I didn't feel this, I would be awake. If I didn't feel this, I would be enlightened. If I didn't feel this, I would be spiritual, more spiritual, and so on. So become sensitive to how you reject all movements, all energetic movements, or some energetic movements that arise in you that are unwanted, unwelcome. As you become more sensitive to that, you will notice a certain tightness. That tightness is the cause of suffering. That tightness is the cause of separation. Now you are separate from life. If you become sensitive to this more and more and more, the futility of that resistance will become obvious. And you may eventually turn towards tenderness. When you see the tight fist, when you feel it, in ever more subtle ways, your willingness to know tenderness, your willingness to be tenderness, your willingness to turn towards tenderness will start to grow in you, will start to build momentum in you. And even though you don't know how to do it, even though the mind cannot find an understanding in it, even though you don't know what the outcome will be, this is all good, because the turning towards tenderness is like a falling. As the tight fist relaxes its grip, because it's no longer interesting to you, it's like a falling into openness. That openness itself is tenderness. That tenderness, I repeat again, does not have in it necessarily thinking kind thoughts, sending loving vibrations. It has nothing to do with any doing. It has nothing to do with any thinking. It's much deeper than that. It's much closer than that. It's an intimacy with whatever is here. And in that intimacy, it's the end of separation. In that intimacy, all the veils of projection fall away. There's nothing between you and your experience. And then awakeness isn't something that you have to move towards, isn't something that you have to get to. It's something that you already are. It stops being an extraordinary experience and becomes your ordinary living reality. And then all the striving and struggling and efforting to get to somewhere other than where you already are comes to a full stop.